on Thursday, April 17, 2019, at 4:35 p.m. Inside the Federal Justice Complex at Joint Base Milton, I finished the last of my coffee and glanced at my watch. The day had dragged on, and I couldn't wait for it to end. After 3 hours of testifying and answering an endless stream of questions, I found myself in a cramped room with nothing but its "the" in my thoughts. It had been over 2 hours since I'd last seen anyone, and I was starting to wonder when the board would finally reach their decision. Just then, the door opened and Commander Jack Tanner, my legal rep, stepped in. "They're done for the day, Lieutenant Turner," he informed me. "That's me," I replied. "Jackson Turner, or just Jack to friends and family. I'm a senior flight lieutenant in the United States Space Corps, formerly known as the Space Force, which was established almost 80 years ago. They want you back at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. Head back to your quarters," Commander Tanner instructed. "And remember, no talking to the other witnesses, especially your wife." "You mean my soon-to-be ex-wife, the cheating one?" I clarified, bitterness lacing my words. He nodded. "Exactly," he confirmed. "Now get going, Lieutenant, and stay out of trouble." "Yes, sir," I replied, standing up. I stretched, grabbed my case, and headed out. I drove my small electric car back to the BOQ, where I quickly changed clothes, microwaved a veggie burger, and grabbed a cold beer. After a quick meal, I settled into my chair, flipped on the TV to check the news, but found nothing worth watching. I leaned back, letting my thoughts drift over the events of the past few weeks. Until recently, I'd been serving as the weapons officer aboard the USS Liberty, a top-of-the-line spacecraft named after an iconic American symbol. It housed a crew of 110 and carried an impressive array of firepower: nuclear missiles, energy weapons, rail guns, and mini lasers. The Liberty's maiden voyage to Saturn was supposed to be special, not just because of the mission itself, but because my wife, Camilla, was also on board as the chief pilot. We were high school sweethearts who'd vowed to be faithful to each other, and we shared a dream of exploring space together. Despite being stationed at the same base, our assignments often kept us apart, but I never once questioned her loyalty. While she was away on missions, I threw myself into training in Graft-CH, a martial art designed for low-gravity environments, honing my skills and staying focused. I had no reason to doubt her, and I never even entertained the possibility of her being unfaithful. Temptations arose, of course, but I stayed true to our relationship, never imagining she'd betray me. We had often fantasized about being together in zero gravity on the moon or Mars, experiencing the kind of closeness only space could offer. So, when we both received orders for the Liberty, it felt like our dreams were finally coming true. But what started as a dream quickly turned into a nightmare. I remember the day we launched like it was yesterday, Friday, January 3, 2019, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I was suited up and deep in thought as I boarded the shuttle that would take me to the Liberty, which was in orbit. Camilla, as the chief pilot, had left earlier that morning on the first shuttle. I was on the third shuttle, with 3 more scheduled to follow. Seated next to me was Commander Rick Harrison, better known as Ironclad for his sheer size and tough demeanor. We'd gone through the academy together, though we hadn't interacted much. Ironclad had been Camilla's mentor back then a strict instructor, but our paths hadn't crossed much beyond that. "Excited to serve with your wife, Turner?" Ironclad asked, his deep voice breaking my thoughts. "Yes, sir, I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "This mission's going to make history," he remarked. "Going further than we've ever gone, to Saturn and back in under 120 days. Quite the journey," I said, as the pumps beneath us whirred, signaling our imminent launch. Ironclad grunted. "Time to say goodbye to Earth," he muttered before reclining in his seat. We braced for liftoff, and as the shuttle rumbled beneath us, gravity's pull intensified. Through the window, I watched the clouds whip past as we ascended into the darkness, Earth's curve visible below. The boosters detached with a jolt, heading back for reuse at the launch site. An hour later, a massive structure came into view. "There she is," Ironclad said, lifting his visor. Docking a few minutes later, the shuttle approached the Liberty's open dock. The connection sealed with a hiss as the pressure equalized. "There we go," Ironclad said. "Prepare for gravity. We're running at 0 H. I could feel the weight of my gear increase as we approached the Liberty, from near zero gravity in the shuttle to the ship's artificial gravity system. I was grateful to feel the pull again. Space can wreak havoc on your body without gravity. I headed to my cabin hoping to find Camilla, but she wasn't there. Her belongings were already neatly stowed, a clear sign she had arrived earlier. I changed into my flight suit, grabbed my cap, and made my way to the bridge. As the weapons officer, it was my job to ensure all our systems were in working order. The bridge was buzzing with activity as I ran through my calibration routines, checking the missile platforms, energy weapons, and targeting systems. Everything had to be in perfect working order, especially under Captain Daniel Myers, a no-nonsense leader I had served with before. After submitting my report to Captain Myers, who recognized me from our last mission together, we verified the codes for the cruise missiles. 2 keys required for launch, one held by the captain, one by me. To have you aboard, Turner, Captain Mayer said. I hear you're married to our chief pilot, Camilla. Yes, sir, I responded. Should make things interesting for you, he said with a smile. I hope so, sir, I replied, glancing at Camilla as she smiled mischievously at me before returning to her duties. Ironclad arrived on the bridge, his eyes cold as ever. I returned to my station, making sure everything was ready. Myers had a habit of running weapons drills at unexpected times, so I had to be prepared as always. We started with a calibration check to ensure everything was perfect. Once that was done, Captain Myers initiated the final pre-launch procedures. All systems were green. We were ready to launch. All systems go, Myers called out. Engines are running hot and steady, came the reply from Lieutenant Scott, our chief engineer. Weapon systems are all set, calibrated, and accounted for, I confirmed from my station. Navigation? Captain Myers asked. Courses plotted and locked. ETA at Mars Station is 440 hours, Lieutenant Ryan, our navigator, reported. All personnel in place and ready for launch, Ironclad said from his position. Myers nodded and pressed a button on his console. Houston, this is Liberty requesting permission to launch. Launch authorization granted, Liberty. Godspeed, came the response from Mission Control. Roger that, Houston, Myers replied before turning to Camilla. Helmsman, take us out nice and easy. Aye, sir, Camilla responded, her hands moving swiftly over the controls. 2 levers pulled, the control column in her hands steady. The Liberty inched forward, maneuvering thrusters guiding us out of the dock. It wasn't until we were clear of the structure that Camilla engaged the main thrusters. The ship vibrated as the ion fusion engines roared to life, and we accelerated, leaving Earth behind, spiraling out of orbit toward Point Bravo. ETA to Bravo Point is 2 minutes, sir. All clear ahead, the navigator's voice came over the comms again. Copy that, Captain Myers acknowledged. Engines warmed up and ready? Engines are primed, Lieutenant Scott confirmed. Hitting Point Bravo in 3, 2, 1, the navigator counted down. Punch it, Myers commanded, and Camilla executed the order with precision. The ship surged forward, the hum of the engines growing louder as the thrusters pushed us to speeds unimaginable on Earth. I stole a glance at Camilla, pride swelling in my chest. She was good at what she did, and I couldn't help but smile at her. But as I turned back to my console, I caught a glimpse of Ironclad, his expression stone cold, eyes fixed on Camilla. Something about his demeanor unsettled me, but I pushed the thought aside. We had a mission to focus on. An hour later, my anger turned as Ironclad posted the officer schedules for the coming shifts. I noticed something that made my blood run cold. I'd been assigned to the second shift. In space, we followed Houston's time schedule with simulated day and night shifts. Senior officers like myself usually took the first shift, so seeing my name on the second shift meant that I'd barely have any time with Camilla. Her name was listed for the first shift, and the overlap between our schedules would be minimal, just a few minutes during shift change. I clenched my fists. This felt like a demotion, and Ironclad knew it. Is there a scheduling problem, Lieutenant? Ironclad's voice cut through my anger. He was standing right in front of my console, arms crossed. I stood up, meeting his gaze. Am I still the senior weapons officer, sir? Yes, of course, he replied with a smirk. Then, why am I on the second shift? I demanded. It feels like I'm being sidelined. In my opinion, it's the best place for you, Ironclad said, his voice low but firm. If you have a problem with the schedule, you can take it up with the captain through me. By then, Captain Myers had noticed the exchange and approached. What seems to be the issue here, gentlemen? LT. Turner isn't happy with the bridge schedule, sir, Ironclad said, his tone deliberately neutral. Myers looked over the schedule and frowned. I understand his concern, number one. It's highly unusual, don't you agree? Yes, sir, normally I would, Ironclad replied smoothly. But I think Lieutenant Turner's skills are best utilized on the second shift. It also gives us a chance to train the other gunnery officers during the first shift. I knew he was full of it. This wasn't about training other officers. This was about keeping me away from Camilla. Captain Myers wasn't buying it either. Is that the only reason, Commander, or is there something more? He asked, his eyes narrowing. If I may speak freely, sir, Ironclad said. Always, Myers replied. I've never been a fan of spouses serving on the same ship, especially in close quarters. It's a distraction, and I don't want them losing focus on their duties. I sighed but nodded. I see. I understand your concerns, but I won't allow this to affect morale. Make sure they have time together. Understood, Ironclad said, though the look in his eyes told me he didn't mean it. Captain Myers turned to me. Can you handle that, Lieutenant? Yes, sir, I replied through gritted teeth. Good. Carry on, Myers said before walking away. Ironclad leaned in closer to me, his voice barely a whisper. Don't worry, Turner. I'll keep a close eye on your wife, he smirked before turning on his heel and walking off, leaving me fuming at my station. I turned to Alice, who quickly put a finger to her lips. Don't say anything, Jack, she said in a low voice. Bridge was diligently performing their duties. I took a deep breath, allowing myself a moment of pride for being part of this crew. We'll talk later. I'll call Lieutenant Anderson. Yes, ma'am, I muttered quietly. I glanced over at Camilla, who was focused on her console, her face flushed. I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or guilt. Feeling humiliated, I left the bridge, my mind racing. Something was definitely off. I headed to the mess hall, hoping to grab something to eat. It wasn't mealtime, so I figured the options would be limited. The guy behind the plexiglass partition shrugged as I approached. Not much left, Lieutenant. We've got these artificial meat burgers. They taste awful, but they'll fill you up. That'll do, I said, taking one on a tray. He handed me a packet of ketchup and grinned. Want some axle grease to go with it? Sure, why not? I replied with a weak smile, taking the packet. Thanks. Anytime, Lieutenant, he said, nodding as I walked off to find a table. I sat down and ate in silence, drowning the bland burger in ketchup to make it bearable. It wasn't great, but at least it filled me up. After finishing, I tossed the tray in the trash, and then headed back to my quarters. I lay down, hoping sleep would come. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Ironclad. What did he mean when he said he'd keep an eye on Camilla? After tossing and turning for about an hour, I gave up frustrated. I threw on my workout clothes and headed for the gym on one of the lower decks. Thankfully, the place was empty. Good, I thought. I could work out some of my frustration without anyone around. I stretched, hit the treadmill for a bit, then moved to the weight machines. Afterward, I adjusted the gravity to 0.4G and practiced some grav-tac moves. By the time I was done, I was drenched in sweat and finally ready to sleep. I reset the gravity and returned to my quarters, taking a quick shower in a tiny bathroom. I set my alarm and fell asleep the second my head hit the pillow. When the alarm went off, I groggily got up, showered again, shaved and dressed. I headed to the galley for a quick snack, which was much better than the awful burger I'd had earlier. Then I made my way to the bridge, just as Camilla was getting off her shift. Hello, stranger, I said with a smile. She looked at me, returning the smile. Hi. I didn't get a chance to say it earlier, but you did a great job with the lunch, I said to lift her spirits. Thank you, she replied, a bit softer now. Maybe I'll stop by during your lunch break, and we can spend some time together, I suggested, fully expecting her to come up with an excuse. To my surprise, she didn't. Sure, I'll set an alarm, she said, a playful glint in her eyes. Maybe you can have me instead of one of those fake burgers. Works for me, I said, relieved. See you in 6 hours. I'll be there, she replied, giving me a quick kiss before heading off. I watched her walk away, feeling a sliver of hope that maybe we could make things work. Just as I turned back, I caught sight of Ironclad. Grinning? About time you showed up, Turner, he said smugly. I glanced at my watch. My shift doesn't start for another 15 minutes, Commander, I replied evenly. Just wanted to talk to my wife before duty, if that's all right with you. For a moment, I thought he might snap at me, but he just shrugged. Yeah, all right, he said, walking off down the corridor. I made my way onto the bridge and took over for Lieutenant Anderson, who handed over the shift and walked out. As I started running the necessary calibrations, Alice approached me. How are you holding up? She asked softly. I'll be fine, Alice, I said, trying to brush it off. Seriously, how are you doing? She pressed concern in her voice. It's not easy, but I can handle it. Thanks for asking, I replied. You're welcome, she said. Listen, I know you've got a lot on your mind, but I think you should keep an eye on Sela and Commander Harrison, she added, her voice dropping lower. I looked at her shocked. You think something's going on between them? Maybe, she said, her tone cautious. Call it female intuition, but I've noticed some glances between them. Nothing obvious, but there's definitely something there. Got it, I said, my stomach twisting. Thanks for the heads up. I'm planning to meet up with her during lunch. Hopefully, that'll help. I hope so too, Jack, she said with a nod. But don't go telling the captain without solid proof. Accusing his senior officer without evidence could blow up in your face. I'll be careful, I assured her. Thanks for watching out for me. She nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I finished the calibration and inspected the missile systems, making sure everything was in working order. By the time I was done, Captain Myers was back on the bridge. How about a little target practice? He suggested with a grin. Sure thing, sir, I replied, eager for the distraction. Launch some drones, Myers instructed. I set up 5 drones and activated the mini lasers, which were like old-school miniguns, but fired beams of intense heat. The lasers quickly destroyed the drones with pinpoint accuracy. Nice work, Lieutenant, Myers praised. Thank you, sir, I replied. Why don't you take the sender's seat while I catch a quick nap? He said, already heading toward his quarters. Yes, sir, thank you, I said, sliding into the command chair. I'd served with Captain Myers long enough to know he was fond of power naps. Sitting in the command seat felt good, like I had control over the ship and its crew. Each officer on the bridge was diligently performing their duties. I took a deep breath, allowing myself a moment of pride for being part of this crew. Bridge wore a wrist device that acted as a multi-tool timekeeper, communicator, tracker, and vital signs monitor. The only time it wasn't worn was in the shower. I pulled up the tracking monitor and quickly located Ironclad in his quarters, his steady pulse showing on the readout. indicating he was still wearing his device. Next, I checked Camilla's beacon and saw she was also in our quarters, her vital signs steady and asleep. For a moment, I was tempted to review the tracker history, but I didn't have the necessary clearance. Plus, if I got caught snooping, it would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. Convinced that I wouldn't find anything incriminating, I deactivated the tracker and focused back on the bridge. Everyone seemed to be busy with their duties, paying no attention to me. I returned to my console, double-checking the systems. Everything was operating smoothly, and we had a course adjustment coming up in about an hour, already programmed into the navigation system. The comms officer was in regular contact with Houston's flight control, so there wasn't much for me to do unless the captain's intervention was required. About 2 hours into the shift, Petty Officer Marks came by, taking drink orders. Ship regulations allowed us to have drinks at our stations as long as they had covers and straws. She returned shortly after with beverages for everyone, just in time for my lunch break. Captain Mears returned to the bridge, taking his seat. I briefed him on the shift's progress, and he nodded, making a few notes in his journal. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said. "Go ahead and take your break," he added, giving me a knowing wink. "Yes, sir," I said, stepping away from my post and heading for our quarters. I paused outside the hatch, taking a deep breath before entering. Camilla was already awake, stretching as the alarm had just gone off. "Ready for dinner?" she asked with a teasing smile. I grinned and joined her on the bed. "Absolutely," I said, pulling her close. We shared an intimate moment, and for a brief while, all the tension and doubts melted away. "That was incredible," she said afterward, her breathing still heavy. "Much needed," I agreed. "I missed you." "Missed you too," she said softly, leaning her head on my chest. "I love you so much." "Love you too," I replied, feeling a bit of the old connection return. But as I checked the time, reality hit. "We've got to clean up and get back soon," I reminded her. She sighed but nodded. "You're right." She glanced at the clock. 40 minutes left in your break," she observed. "Maybe we can sneak in round 2 during your lunch break?" she suggested with a sly grin. "Definitely," I agreed, feeling a little better. I rose, took a quick shower, and got dressed before leaving the cabin. I kissed her, then dimmed the lights and adjusted the gravity back to 0. 7. I headed to the galley for a quick bite before my shift, grabbing a tuna sandwich to refuel. Space love was nothing like in the movies. With low gravity, blood flow and other physiological issues made things complicated, and while the ship's artificial gravity helped, it was still tricky. Scientists once thought sending couples to space would be a bad idea, but advances in artificial gravity in the early 2000s changed all that, allowing married couples to serve together under specific conditions. Camilla and I had found a way to make it work, but I couldn't help but wonder how much longer it would last. After my sandwich, I made my way back to the bridge, arriving just in time. Captain Myers greeted me with a smile. "How was your lunch?" "Good, sir," I said, taking my seat and getting back to my duties. Over the next 17 days, Camilla and I saw each other during breaks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us going. I had limited interaction with Ironclad, which was a relief, and Alice kept me updated on anything unusual she noticed. So far, there hadn't been any major red flags, but something still didn't sit right with me. As we approached Mars Station, I started feeling uneasy again. Something was off and I couldn't shake it. When we docked, I was looking forward to Sage leave with Camilla at Hans's base. We'd planned to spend time together, just the two of us, away from the ship and its tensions. But my plans were abruptly derailed when Ironclad informed me of an issue with one of the weapon stations. "What?" I asked, surprised. "I checked the systems just a few hours ago. Everything was fine." Lieutenant Anderson, who had been covering the shift before docking, explained that the issue had cropped up right before we docked. "Something's wrong with the mini lasers, sir," he said. I felt a surge of frustration. "I'll take a look at it," I said, determined to get to the bottom of the issue. "We've got 72 hours here," Ironclad reminded me. "Make sure those weapons are ready to go by launch." Disheartened, I turned to Camilla, who gave me a reassuring smile. "It'll be okay. We'll still visit Hans's base. I'll bring you back a souvenir." Ironclad smirked as he added, "Don't worry, Turner. I'll keep an eye on your wife while you're busy." His words stung, and I clenched my jaw in silence. Captain Myers approached us. "Ready for some downtime?" he asked, clearly unaware of the tension. "Yes, but Turner here needs to check out the weapon systems first," Ironclad said. Myers looked at me. "Is there a problem with the lasers?" "Mini lasers are out of calibration, sir," Anderson explained. "When did this happen?" Myers asked, frowning. "Just before docking," Anderson replied. Myers turned to me. "Better check it out, Lieutenant." "I'll join you." "Thank you, sir," I said, grateful for his support. I threw a quick glance at Ironclad, who looked less than pleased. "I'll help too," Anderson offered, eager to be of assistance. "Much appreciated, Anderson," I said. "Let's head to the station before the shuttles leave." Ironclad gave me a look, but Captain Myers cut him off. "Go ahead, number 1, he instructed, waving him off. Ironclad walked away, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief as I watched him leave. As I made my way to the weapons bay, Alice caught up with me. "Something's fishy, Jack," she whispered. "I'll keep an eye out while you're working." "Thanks, Alice," I said, grateful for her vigilance. Once I reached the weapons station, I changed into my work uniform. "Which lasers are having issues?" I asked Anderson. "Number 2 and number 5, sir," Anderson responded. "I'll handle number 2. You check number 5, but let's inspect them all," I instructed. "Understood, sir," Anderson said, heading off to work on the other lasers. Captain Myers joined me shortly after I started unscrewing the control panel of Laser 2. "What's the situation?" he asked, pulling on his gloves. "Just about to find out," I replied, prying the panel open. Inside, I immediately noticed the problem. A gear in the drive system had broken off, and the E-clip that held it in place was missing. "Oh," I muttered, inspecting the damage. "What's the issue?" Myers asked, stepping closer. "Someone's tampered with this device," I explained, holding up the broken gear. "The E-clip is missing, and the drive gear is damaged. Could that have impacted the weapon system?" he questioned, concern clear in his voice. "Absolutely," I confirmed. "If the lasers had been active, they might have pierced the hull." "How could this happen?" he wondered aloud. "It seems deliberate," I speculated. "These systems are sealed. You'd need a specific tool like this one," I said, showing him the tool I had used. "Can it be fixed?" Myers inquired. "Yes, but it'll take time," I replied. "About 8 to 10 hours, assuming no further issues come up." "Wow," Myers remarked. "Need some help?" "I appreciate the offer, but this task needs to be handled solo." "No, sir. I can manage, but thanks. There's only room for one set of hands in here." Just then, Anderson called in on comms. "Lieutenant, the E-clip is broken on my end too, and the drive gear is damaged." I turned to Myers. "We'll need to replace the entire control unit," I informed him. "Agreed," Myers nodded. "And get the armory to inspect all weapon platforms." "Understood," Anderson replied. "What are the odds of 2 control units failing simultaneously?" Myers asked, his brow furrowed. "Highly unlikely," I responded. "These units are among the most reliable in our inventory. I've never seen one malfunction like this, let alone 2 at the same time." "Could it be a manufacturing flaw?" Myers suggested. "I doubt it, sir," I replied. "These systems go through rigorous testing before installation. I've worked with hundreds of these and never encountered an issue like this." "We need to notify Houston," Myers decided. "We'll bring in engineers from Mars Station and run a full Level 5 diagnostic. It's absurd that a $1 trillion spacecraft could be halted by a missing E-clip." I nodded in agreement. "Keep me updated on the progress," Myers instructed. "Yes, sir," I affirmed. As he left, I turned back to the device, removing the control box entirely. As I did, something caught my eye, a dark stain on the interior hull. It wasn't transmission grease. Upon closer inspection, it looked like blood. Whoever sabotaged the system had injured themselves in the process. I carefully used a pair of tweezers to collect a sample of the substance, sealing it in a small bag. I planned to take it to the medical facility for DNA analysis later. While an armorer replaced the faulty control box, my mind kept wandering back to Rick. He seemed determined to keep Camilla and me apart, Chang's schedules, and now perhaps sabotaging the weapon systems. His words about taking care of her only added fuel to the fire. The idea that she might have been unfaithful with him made my stomach churn. After the new control box was installed and a dry test run successfully completed, I logged the maintenance and noted the lost time, 10 hours that could have been spent on shore leave with Camilla. There were no additional clues in the log. Anderson confirmed the installation and reported no other issues, though I instructed him to carry out a full visual inspection and inventory of all weapons and missiles. On my way to the bridge, I made a stop at the medical bay. "How are you, Lieutenant Turner?" Chief Benson greeted me. "Could you run a DNA test for me?" I asked. "We have the equipment, but the final analysis will need verification by a certified lab," she explained. I handed her the sample. "I need to know whose blood this is," I stated. "I'll get started," she promised. "It'll take a few hours, and we need to compare it to existing DNA records." "I appreciate it, Chief. Keep this confidential, please." She agreed, nodding. "Of course, sir." I thanked her and left, heading to the bridge to give my report. Myers was waiting by the hatch to his ready room. "Exit?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I confirmed. "Lieutenant Anderson is checking the remaining systems now." "Good. Step into my office, Lieutenant," he said, gesturing for me to follow. Inside, I found Alice and Commander Carlson, the ship's senior security officer. Alice closed the hatch and sat down. "Thank you both for coming so quickly," Myers began, addressing Alice and Carlson. "We have a situation. It appears there's been sabotage aboard the ship. 2 weapon systems were tampered with before our arrival at Mars Station. I've been instructed to conduct an initial investigation and to contact the Corps' Criminal Investigation Division. They won't arrive for at least 36 hours, so we have that time to gather as much information as we can. I'm granting you both full access to the tracking history." Carlson nodded. "Understood, sir. I need to know who accessed those weaponized units as soon as possible." Mears continued. "This investigation must be thorough but discreet. We can't let the crew catch wind of this." We understand, sir, Carlson affirmed. A team of engineers from Mars Station is conducting full Level 5 diagnostics on the ship, Myers added. It'll take 72 hours. Command doesn't want us departing with a potential saboteur on board. What's the plan for the mission? I asked. The mission may be cancelled, Myers said flatly. We can't take the risk. I raised my hand to interject. Just one thing, sir. I found blood on the control box we replaced. I've sent a sample to the medical bay for DNA analysis. Good call, Myers said. I'll follow up with Chief Benson. Anything else? We all shook our heads. Dismissed, he concluded. Yes, sir, Carlson said, standing and leaving the room. I secured my tool bag on the weapons console as I prepared to depart the bridge, but before I could leave, Alice called me over. Jack, she said softly. Yes, ma'am, I responded. I've been keeping an eye on Camilla and Commander Harrison, she said, lowering her voice. They're quite close. What do you mean? I asked, my heart sinking. She showed me her phone. My stomach lurched as I saw the pictures. Camilla and Rick entering a club together, hand in hand, dancing, drinking, and engaging in intimate behavior. In another set of images, they were entering a hotel together. Their intentions were unmistakable. I'm sorry, Jack, Alice whispered. I thought you should know. Thank you, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I appreciate it. Will you tell the captain? She asked gently. I don't have a choice, I replied, my chest tightening. But I'm glad you told me first. I left the bridge in a daze, catching up with Anderson. We completed the remaining system checks and conducted an inventory. My shift ended, and I grabbed a quick snack in the galley before returning to my quarters, hoping for some rest. Sleep didn't come easily with thoughts of Camilla and Rick swirling in my mind, but eventually, I drifted off. A few hours later, I woke, showered, and dressed. Just as I was about to leave, Camilla walked into the cabin looking refreshed. Did you enjoy yourself? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Yes. We had a good time, she replied nonchalantly. Sorry you couldn't join us. Maybe next time. I stared at her, my anger bubbling beneath the surface. What were the engineers doing on the station? She asked, changing the subject. Routine maintenance, I replied shortly. What's your plan now? She asked, sitting down casually. I'm going to rest, I said, trying to keep my tone even. I'm off duty for the next 12 hours. Are you starting your shift? Yes, she confirmed, looking at me with a soft smile. Did you manage to fix the issue? I believe so, I answered. Good, she said, standing up. Missed you out there. Really? I retorted, unable to hold back anymore. That's not the impression I got. What do you mean? She asked, suddenly on guard. I heard you and Rick had some fun, I said coldly. Anything you want to tell me? She looked at me, pretending to be shocked. We danced and had a few drinks, but that's it, she insisted. Nothing else. Of course not, she exclaimed, feigning innocence. Why would you even think that? Forget it, I muttered, moving toward the door. She tried to stop me, reaching out for a kiss, but I turned my head, letting her kiss my cheek instead. Jack, I love you, she said softly. What's wrong? You tell me, I replied, walking out of the cabin before she could say another word. As I walked away, my mind churned with anger and confusion. Did she really think she could fool me that easily? Did she expect me not to notice, not to care? I headed back to my station and noticed that Rick was absent. I continued with the diagnostics, focusing on my work to keep my mind off the mess with Camilla. After about 7 hours, I realized I hadn't eaten, so I decided to take a lunch break. As I finished up, I made the decision to confront Camilla directly. I needed answers. I made my way back to our quarters, determined to have it out with her, but when I opened the hatch, I was greeted by a sight no husband should ever witness. There on our bed were Camilla and Rick entangled together. The room's gravity had been set to 0, 9G, making everything feel just a bit heavier than normal. They both turned to me, caught off guard. Camilla scrambled to cover herself while Rick, with that smug grin on his face, simply adjusted his clothing. Shut the hatch, Rick ordered coldly, his voice filled with arrogance. What the hell are you doing here? My mind was racing, but I kept my cool. I live here, Commander, I said through gritted teeth. As Rick dressed, he chuckled under his breath. Didn't your wife tell you we were just having a little fun? He looked at me with contempt, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. But before I could respond, Rick continued, Listen, why don't we talk outside, Turner? Man to man. Camilla looked at me with a mix of guilt and shame, her eyes pleading. I'm sorry, Jack, she whispered. We can talk about this later. I ignored her, and focused on Rick, who motioned for me to follow him out into the hallway. Reluctantly, I went, but not before turning on the video recording function on my suit. It was a feature we all had meant for, documenting incidents during missions. This I decided would be one of those incidents. As we walked, Rick continued to mock me, talking about how Camilla had come to him for support. He even praised my idea of adjusting the gravity in the quarters, claiming it made things more interesting. When I asked him how long this had been going on, he smirked and said, 2nd year at the academy, Turner. She came to me for guidance and, well, let's just say she couldn't resist. I wanted to hit him to wipe that smug grin off his face, but I knew better. My career was on the line, and I wasn't about to let him bait me into doing something stupid. So you've always been there for her, huh? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Absolutely, Lieutenant, he replied, not bothering to hide his pride. I have an act for keeping her happy. And was that why you changed the bridge schedule? I pressed, sensing his admission was close. You catch on quick, Turner, Rick said with a smirk. It's all part of the job. And the sabotage? I asked, the tension thick in the air. Rick looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. Yes, he said, making air quotes around the word investigation. What's your next move? Planning to get rid of me? I asked, my fists clenched. He chuckled, leading us into the elevator. Certainly not, Lieutenant. Would I take out an officer just for a fling? You've got me all wrong. We reached the airlock, and Rick stopped, his hand hovering over the control panel. The inner hatch was already open, and all the spacesuits had been removed. He pulled out a small pistol and aimed it at me. You think you've figured it all out, huh? He said with a smirk. I know enough, I replied, my mind racing. What now? Are you planning to make it look like an accident? Rick's grin widened. It's simple, really. After discovering your wife's affair, you grew despondent, sabotaged the weapons systems to frame me, and then took your own life when she said she was leaving you. Who do you think Command will believe? A failed husband, or a decorated officer like me? I took a deep breath, assessing the situation. The gravity was set at 0. 8G, not ideal for fighting, but manageable. In one quick motion, I leaped up and struck Rick twice, sending him reeling. Before he could recover, I slammed the hatch shut, locking him inside the airlock. He banged on the door, furious. Let me out, Turner. You're making a big mistake. I've got one question, Commander, I said, staring through the small window. Did Camilla know about your plan? Rick's face twisted into a sneer. Of course she did. It was her idea. Now open the door, Lieutenant, before I make things worse for you. I reached for the control panel, but instead of opening the inner door, I hit the button to release the outer hatch. Rick's eyes widened in shock as he realized what was happening. No, wait, he shouted, but it was too late. The outer door slid open, and Rick was sucked into the vacuum of space, his body tumbling helplessly, caught off guard. Without a suit, he had only seconds before the air in his lungs expanded, causing excruciating pain. He would either suffocate or freeze in a matter of moments. I activated the comms. Man overboard. Starboard airlock number 2, I announced calmly. The alarm blared throughout the ship, and soon a crowd gathered at the airlock. Captain Myers and Alice were among the first to arrive, followed closely by Camilla. Commander Harrison, sir, I said, handing Captain Myers a die to drive. He confessed to sabotaging the weapon systems and having an affair with Lieutenant Turner. He also tried to kill me and make it look like a suicide. It's all on here. Camilla's face went pale as she peered into the airlock, her eyes filling with tears as she realized Rick was gone. His body was now drifting in an unstable orbit around Mars, making recovery nearly impossible. You killed him, you fool! She screamed, tears streaming down her face. I hate you. That's enough, Lieutenant, Myers interjected, stepping in to defuse the situation. He turned to Alice and said, take her to sick bay, and then hand her over to security. He turned back to me, his expression solemn. You're relieved of duty pending the investigation. I'll handle it, I responded quietly. All right, that's it, Myers commanded, turning to the rest of the group. Back to work. We've done all we can here. He turned to Commander Carlson. Once she's settled, find her a berth away from the bridge and reach out to Mars Station for the recovery of Commander Harrison's body. Understood, sir, Carlson replied, walking off. Myers then addressed Alice. Looks like you're stepping up. You're my new number 1 until further notice. Just bridge duties accordingly. The mission's likely scrapped. Yes, sir, Alice acknowledged. We've wrapped up our initial inquiry. Myers continued. We need to go over our findings in my quarters, ASAP. Got it, sir, Alice affirmed. She then turned to me, her expression softening. I'm sorry, Jack. You didn't deserve any of this. Thanks, Commander, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. I headed back to my quarters. Gathering Camilla's belongings, I packed them into her duffel bag, wanting her as far from me as possible. Security later retrieved her things. I didn't ask where they were taking them, and I didn't care. I flipped the mattress and replaced the soiled bedding, tossing the old linens into the laundry chute. With restricted access to my quarters, I sat down at the computer console and filled out the divorce request. Since our marriage fell under JID jurisdiction, the divorce process also involved them. There were no children, and our incomes were similar. So, it was a straightforward split. She kept her stuff and I kept mine. After submitting the request, I awaited confirmation, knowing it would be processed within 24 hours. 2 CE agents from Hun's base reached out to me for questioning, hinting at a vengeful motive behind the events. Thankfully, the JAG officer present during the interrogation ensured I didn't say anything self-incriminating. The following day, I avoided the crew and kept to myself, trying to stay out of the gossip mill. I spent most of the time in my quarters on edge. Then, unexpectedly, Myers and Alice showed up. Lieutenant Myers began taking a seat as Alice joined him. Mars Station recovered Commander Harrison's body, and they confiscated the illegal firearm he had on him. CIA report confirms your actions as self-defense. He paused, then added, Commander Harrison's tracker shows he was present at both sabotaged weapon stations just before Lieutenant Anderson noticed the calibration errors, and the DNA from the blood matches his. Alice added, confirming he was responsible for the sabotage. Your wife claimed she knew nothing. Myers clarified, but she's been detained as an accessory to Harrison's plot against you. She could face conspiracy charges when we return to Earth. So we're heading back? I asked, trying to process everything. Myers nodded. The mission's on hold for now, Jack. We face a board of inquiry when we return. Can I resume duty? I asked. After a moment of consideration, Myers nodded. Houston agreed after some persuasion. We down 2 officers, and we need you on bridge duty. Can you handle gunner ops? Yes, sir, I affirmed. Good, Myers replied. We launch in 12 hours. Make sure you're rested and ready. Thank you, sir, I said, relieved. May I speak with my wife? I need some answers. Myers gave me a searching look. Are you sure about this, Jack? Absolutely, I confirmed. After a brief pause, he consented. All right, Jack, but Commander Powell will accompany you. Do you agree? Yes, sir, Alice confirmed. Very well, Myers concluded. Now get to work and rest up. It's time to earn that paycheck. Yes, sir, I responded as he left. Alice turned to me. Ready, Lieutenant? She asked. I nodded. Yes, ma'am. We exited together and made our way to the brig on the lower deck. As we walked, Alice broke the silence. Captain Myers wanted me to tell you he commended you for what you did. I asked, genuinely surprised. He believes your actions saved lives. If Harrison had fired that weapon in the airlock, things could have been much worse. Damn, I muttered. Alice grinned. Congrats, she said. We reached the brig and checked in with the security officer on duty. Inside, we approached a small cell where Camilla sat on the bed, wearing an orange jumpsuit. What up, Lieutenant? She sneered as I entered. So now it's just Lieutenant? Not even Jack or Lieutenant Turner? I remarked, my voice cold. Fine, prisoner. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then I'll leave you alone. Go ahead, Lieutenant, she replied, staring straight ahead without acknowledging me. How long were you involved with Harrison? Since sophomore year at the academy, she admitted, her voice flat. He was my counselor. I know that much, I said. Where did it start? You really want to know? She challenged, turning to face me for the first time. Yeah, I do, I affirmed, standing firm. Fine. I failed the test, and he helped me cheat. After that, I owed him, so I entertained him. I enjoyed it, so it kept happening, she explained nonchalantly. So you cheated with him and betrayed me. Is that it? I asked, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Yes, she confessed, her tone laced with venom. You don't know how many times I thought of him when I was with you. And you know what? I liked it. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. And here's something else, you never measured up. He's been to places you could never reach. I clenched my fists but forced myself to remain calm. Did you ever love me, or was it all a lie? I loved you, she said, her voice softening for a moment. But I loved being with him too. It was just sex, nothing more. You knew about his plans once we boarded, didn't you? I asked. Yeah, I knew, she admitted. Staggered the shifts, so we wouldn't see each other much, but you surprised us by talking to me. So we waited until Mars. And you knew about the weapon sabotage? I knew he was up to something, but not the specifics, she confessed. I didn't think he'd go that far. And my supposed self-destruction? That was part of the plan too, wasn't it? She shrugged. It was his idea. But you went along with it. You never stopped him. I pressed. No, I didn't, she admitted, her voice quieter now. And I'm sorry. I never thought he'd actually go through with it. Well, he failed, and now you're going to prison. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice hollow. It doesn't matter, she said, shrugging. I was proud of you, how you handled the ship. I did love you, but now I regret ever meeting you. I turned to leave, but before I could step out, she called my name. Jack, she said softly. I didn't look back. Instead, I raised my middle finger and walked out. Upon returning to Earth, Camilla was incarcerated in a federal prison while the investigation continued. Court-martial was grueling, with the crew, myself, Myers, and Alice testifying extensively over several days. My divorce was finalized in early April, with the JAG officer handling the remaining paperwork. On Friday, April 18th, we assembled in the hearing room. Myers, Alice, and I sat together as Camilla entered in chains, flanked by armed guards. The council members adorned in their decorated uniforms took their seats. Admiral Bryant, the head of the council, began the proceedings. Please sit, he said, clarifying that this was a board of inquiry, not a trial. The goal was to uncover what happened and prevent future incidents. After summarizing the events of the mission, Admiral Bryant condemned Commander Harrison for putting personal agendas above duty, endangering the crew, and damaging the ship. He then turned to me. Senior Lieutenant Jackson Turner, he said, addressing me formally. I sat up straighter. Your actions aboard the USS Liberty potentially saved lives and prevented further sabotage. In recognition of your diligence and bravery, we are awarding you the Distinguished Service Medal. He paused before continuing. Additionally, you have been assigned to the Advanced Operations School for training starting June 1st. Thank you, sir, I said, trying to absorb the weight of the moment. The Admiral then turned his attention to Captain Myers. The Council acknowledges your efforts under unprecedented circumstances. However, as the ship's captain, you bear ultimate responsibility for its operations. Your command of the USS Liberty will remain, but an entry will be noted on your record. A new crew will be assigned following the ship's modernization. Understood, Admiral, Myers responded, his expression serious. Lieutenant Powell will be promoted to commander and take over as your first officer, the Admiral concluded. Thank you, sir, Myers said finally. The Admiral turned to Senior Lieutenant Camilla Avery, addressing her using her maiden name now that the divorce was finalized. Camilla stood, her face pale, her hands shackled. This board is deeply disappointed in your conduct, the Admiral continued. Not only did you disgrace your ex-husband, but you tarnished your uniform and put the entire crew at risk. Your actions, along with Commander Harrison's, have led us to reassess your entire record. Commander Harrison's intervention helped you pass a critical test at the Academy. I attest that without his help, you would have failed. While your piloting record is commendable, it is clear that you should never have been commissioned. The Admiral's voice hardened. Your liaison with Harrison resulted in tragedy. You knew of his plot and did nothing to stop it. You will be dishonorably discharged, demoted to E1, and your pay will be reduced effective immediately. He signaled to the guards, who escorted Camilla out. As she passed by, tears streaming down her face, she looked at me. Jack, please, she began, but I cut her off. It's Lieutenant Turner to you, I snapped. Her tears flowed freely now. Request to address you as Lieutenant, she asked, her voice trembling. Request denied, I said coldly. Remove her from my sight. The guards complied, and Camilla's sobs faded as they led her away. Her words held no meaning for me anymore. With the strike of a gavel, the council session was adjourned. We stood as the council members left the room. Once they were gone, Myers turned to me. Well, that wasn't too bad, he remarked. How about a drink? I could use one, I agreed, feeling the weight of the ordeal lifting slightly. I think it went well, Alice chimed in. Count me in. The three of us left the hearing room and headed to the officer club, where we could finally toast to a bittersweet victory. 17 months later, I stood at the airlock of Galileo Station, orbiting Mars's dark side. As I stared out at the stars, I reflected on how far I'd come. Camilla's court-martial had concluded a month before I started the Advanced Spacecraft Management program in Florida. The prosecution had asked me to testify, which I did, though recalling those dark days aboard the Liberty was unpleasant. Camilla had changed at her court-martial. She wore a crewman's uniform, stripped of her wings, and she looked frail and broken. The court found her guilty of being an accessory to my attempted murder, but acquitted her of conspiracy. She was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor and a dishonorable discharge. After graduating from the Advanced Operations School, I was promoted to lieutenant commander and received orders to Galileo Station, a secluded outpost orbiting Mars. Upon my arrival, I was greeted by Captain Allen, an attractive officer who briefed me on the situation. Ready to see your new home for the next few years? She asked, leading me to the observation deck. She pressed a button, revealing the massive advanced spacecraft, the USS Enterprise. This will be your domain as my operations officer. Ready for the adventure? She asked, her eyes gleaming. I couldn't help but smile. Absolutely, Captain. Good. We launch in 15 days, she said, shaking my hand. Welcome aboard, Commander. As I admired the sight of the USS Enterprise, the name emblazoned on its side, I smiled. It was time for another chapter.